Yeah, for real. Cool.
That's the old one. Wait.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are upon service time. If I can remind everyone to please turn off your cell phones from the service.
Esaina, El Hehali, Me'ai, Yavo Ezri, Esaina, El Hehali, Me'ai, Yavo Ezri, Ezri, Mei Madonna, oh, send Shamayim Va'aretz, Esaina, El Hehali, Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, our God and God of our ancestors. The hearts of all of these who mourn are heavy with grief. Give them comfort. They are overcome by pain and tears. Help them to remember the triumph and the joy in the life of Daniel Noah Barnet. They are overwhelmed by loss, oh God. Help them to treasure all that is theirs because Dan lived. Help them also to look beyond this moment, to realize that death will never destroy the bonds of love, and sustain them with the knowledge of our faith that you will not abandon any soul to the grave. Adonai taught us the ways of life. Be our strength, our shield, our stay, and our comfort throughout this day and all of our days. And let us say, Amen. In the spirit of the upcoming festival of Passover in a few weeks, on this sad day, I'm reminded of the special scriptural reading for the Sabbath that will fall in the middle of it. Tucked between commandments about the timing and observance of holidays and the instruction God gave Moses to inscribe a second set of tablets, there is a memorable line which says, Lo yera'u panai rekha. None shall appear before me empty. And this verse had a specific, particular meaning in the ancient context of Torah, that it was essential to make the pilgrimage to the temple in Jerusalem and stand before God's presence at the holy seasons of the year, bearing gifts and sacrifices. However, after the temple was destroyed and the sacrificial cult became obsolete, the rabbinic sages chose to understand this line as an instruction for us in all ages. They taught that throughout our lives, each of us stands before God. From the moment we are born until the moment we die, we're given the precious gift of time. Time we're not to squander away or fill up with selfish or destructive pursuits. Time not to appear before God empty. Instead, we are to fill up our lives, to show up each day with love for our family, with the offerings we share with our community, and with the example of the fullness with which we're living. It is heartbreaking to stand here today grieving the loss of Dan Barnet, a person whose life was certainly not long enough. But it was full in all the ways the rabbis meant. He showed up time after time, ready to offer what he had to others, always reaching out his hand and his heart to help friend and stranger alike. He was always giving the gift of his love to you, Fred and Beth, to his brother, Fred, giving the gifts of love to his nephew and niece, Frederick and Charlie, to the children of friends and his parents' friends. He offered his friendship to so many, as you can see here today, who feel lucky to be counted in his circle. In death, indeed, he stands before God full, with many gifts that he gave during his life. Listen to what his brother Fred said about Dan. When we were young kids, Mom would always tell me to be nice to Dan. She would always say, "You're bigger than him now, but be careful. One day he will be bigger than you, and then you'll be in trouble." I didn't buy it. It made no sense. A little brother can't be bigger than a big brother. Not possible. Okay, so I might have been a little wrong. Mom, you were right about that one. He got bigger than me, and then he kept getting bigger. And I'm not talking about in the his physical size. His kind heart and his personality were enormous. No one could rival his ability to warm up a room. He had big caring emotions. He could listen to your problems and feel your pain without judging or interrupting. He was always a leader. From a young age, he always had so many friends, both older and younger than him. A true leader of men. He was fiercely loyal to his friends, and they were always loyal to him. He could have been a hell of a politician, but he was far too honest and good-hearted to go down that path. From a young age, he excelled at all sports. He was particularly drawn to baseball, where he skillfully played every position except for shortstop and center field. My dad always said he ran the bases like he was dragging a piano behind him. And you couldn't time his speed with a stopwatch. You had to use a calendar. Still, he managed more than his share of extra base hits and even an occasional inside the park home run. More importantly, he was always the kid rallying the other players on the team during games, keeping his teammates focused on the game and their spirits high, encouraging them and bringing out the best in everybody. That's who he was. Yeah, he was a fantastic player, but at the same time, he was an even better coach. As kids, we fought a lot. That's what brothers do. It never lasted long, though. And we were always back to hanging out and causing trouble together shortly after. When we grew older and I started driving, Dan started hanging out with me and my friends. He was younger than us, but we didn't mind. He added a certain element that only Dan could, a certain spontaneity that only he could bring to the table. The kind where you never knew if the night would end up with you making new friends or running from the cops. Later on, he repaid the favor. When I would come back to Denver to visit, he would insist that I stay at his house, which was always filled with friends. It was hard to catch him alone. There were always people coming in and out, whether by coming by to hang out for a few minutes, a few hours, or even a few days. I never minded. He was surrounding himself with good people, people with good virtues and good character, like him. He not only had an open door policy for his house, but also for his heart. He cared, and there was nothing ever fake about it. Over the past years, Dan put his heart and soul into building his business, working extremely hard to grow it into a very impressive operation. I was so very proud of seeing my little brother succeed in such a big way. I enjoyed touring his warehouse each time I went to Denver, amazed at the growth he was able to achieve with his team. He was always encouraging me with my own business, asking me well thought out questions and offering ideas. He was so supportive and was convinced that my business was about to take off. He always cared so much, not just for family and friends, but even for people he didn't know. Nobody else was more likely to hand a few dollars to a hardworking busboy or discreetly slide a $20 bill into a waiter or waitress's hand if he felt that they had been undertipped. To his friends, he loved you all so much. He didn't call you his friends, though, did he? He called you family, and he absolutely felt that way. He was so proud of so many of his friends and their achievements. And every time I got to meet a new friend of his, they would immediately tell me how great he was and that he talked about me nonstop. He was always there if you needed help, always and without question, whether you wanted help or not, or even if you didn't know you needed it yet. He knew. He could feel it. So empathetic, he could feel your pain and give you what you needed. He never pretended to care. It was always 100% genuine. When I started dating Brittany, he warmed to her immediately and was incredibly welcoming to her. To call our family intense would be an understatement, but Dan made Brittany feel so comfortable from the start. I'll never forget when the two of them secretly coordinated a surprise trip and Dan showed up at my door in Atlanta one night, just before midnight. Over the next several years, he came down quite a lot, getting to know Brittany and my crew in Georgia. On one trip, he told me that I needed to stop messing around and propose to her. I had a diamond, but no ring. I showed it to him and told him I was planning on proposing in about 6 months. He reiterated his message in a way that only Dan could. I purchased the ring a few days later. He was a huge help at our wedding reception, and we enjoyed seeing him and spending time with him over the years. Not just at the epic Thanksgiving meals that he would prepare with my dad, but also during random visits in Denver or Atlanta, and then eventually South Carolina. He had a big personality and freely showered love on those closest to him, but the one closest to him turned out to be me, not to be me or my parents or any of his many, many friends. I've never seen Dan happier and more caring than when our son Frederick was born. Dan immediately sprung into action and showered that boy with so much love and affection. I cannot describe how much he loved my son and how good he was with him. And the feeling was mutual from a very young age. We used to joke that Frederick was the new Daniel. They are the same in so many ways. My son has a huge personality and is so caring and compassionate as well. They also may be the two loudest people the world has ever known. They are both bears. Dan would always tell me, I get him. He is me. He has Dan's compassion too. This week, Frederick saw me falling to pieces and he compassionately said to me, well, you always have an Uncle Dan because you have me. When our daughter Charlie was born 2.5 years ago, I got very sick and was close to death. Dan stepped up hugely and was so supportive and helpful. We will be eternally grateful for that and for everything else he did to comfort and assist us. Charlie also loves her Uncle Dan. She always says his name loud and with an exclamation mark, as it should be. It hurts me so bad that she probably won't remember him or truly know how much he loved her. Brittany and I have a third child due on Monday, and Dan was looking forward to coming down and showering the kids with kisses and gifts. Dan, I'm so sorry that you won't be with us physically, but we know you will be there in spirit. I am sorry that I'll never get to give you another hug or pick up the phone to hear you say hello for about 3 minutes while rapping my name over and over. I am so sorry that I can't bring myself to read this without breaking down. I love you, my brother, you legend. When we were little, my mom always told us, be nice to each other. One day your dad and I will be gone and the two of you will be all you have. Unfortunately, Mom, you were wrong about that one. That was good advice, though, and we always took it seriously. We were nice to each other most of the time. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for instilling the importance of sticking together and brotherly love. Because of that, we have a great relationship. Thank you. Mom and Dad, Dan loved you both so much. You two provided us with so much, and especially values and a sense of humanity. Dan received his compassion, his warmth, his love, his work ethic, his energy, and his big heart from the two of you. Dan was such a big personality, so caring, so loving, so loud and booming. His presence was always felt, and now his absence hurts so much. He touched so many lives, and the outpouring of support that our family has received is so humbling and warming at the same time. Thank you all. I often heard him refer to his close friends as his brothers. He meant it too. I know how much he loved me, and he loved each and every one of his friends as brothers, truly. Dan was never religious, but he was always a spiritual guy. I think he would appreciate this verse from Psalm 133. In Hebrew, it is the famous Hinema Tovu Manayim Shevet Achim Gam Yachad, or in English, behold how good and how pleasing it is for brothers to sit together in unity. Thank you, Fred, for that heartfelt tribute. You indeed captured so much of what your folks shared with me about Dan, too. I want to repeat that part about Dan being a bear. He was named in Hebrew Dove, which is bear, after Beth's grandfather, and always felt a deep kinship with bears, insisting that his spirit animal had to be a bear. In fact, he took that so seriously that once on a hunting trip, he refused to shoot bear. No doubt, Dan's beloved Newfoundland Kuma, which means bear in Japanese, was also his spirit animal. I'm so glad he's here. He loved Kuma and Kuma loved him. They were inseparable if Kuma had anything to do with it. As the owner of a successful frozen organic pet food business, naturally Dan was able to take Kuma with him to work. Of course, as a Newfoundland, Kuma's second favorite place to hang out was the freezer. But his very favorite place was wherever Dan was. That dog always wanted to be touching him. And no matter how Dan was feeling on any given day, he walked Kuma for an hour every evening. From the age of 2, Beth and Fred could tell that Dan was already going to be a people person. Their first indication that while Dan was a toddler still in diapers, he asked to go next door to have a chat with their 60-year-old neighbor, Merrill. And growing up, Dan became a really great neighbor himself. He became like a son to his current next door neighbor, Hannah. When her husband was suffering from Parkinson's, Dan took over taking down their trash, clearing their sidewalk, doing grocery shopping for them. Even after her husband died, and even as Dan's health became a challenge, Dan continued to do all those things for Hannah. In grade school, Dan was so lucky. Every year at the school carnivals, he'd win 4 or 5 cakes in a cakewalk. Of course, in true Dan style, he gave them away. That luck followed him into adulthood. There was the time he went to Las Vegas with friends and won thousands of dollars playing craps, holding the dice for hours. And then on top of those winnings, he bet on a long shot in the Kentucky Derby, and that horse came in first. A portion of those winnings went into starting his business, and in typical Dan fashion again, he also spread a portion of it to those who needed it. After a person he knew was assaulted on a local running trail and had to take an extended time off of work, Dan paid her rent for her. He couldn't bear to add any suffering to her suffering. Dan had a brilliant head for business. Despite not having dogs growing up because Beth is allergic, he became an expert in healthy, organic dog food. His business, as Fred said, was flourishing. And true to his personality, business wasn't about amassing wealth for himself. It was about being able to be generous to others. He paid his coworkers well so that they'd be working for him and so they'd be happy working for him and stick around. The same was true about how he made friends. He wasn't interested in prestige or wealth. He befriended every one of you because of your personalities. Dan was an amazing cook, and that started when he was little. And he'd accompany his dad to the grocery store on weekends when it was Beth's time off from cooking for the family. And it started with helping pick out what they needed for the meals and watching his dad cook, which he loved. And then at 7 years old, he made a Caesar salad for a presentation for his classmates at school. And then Thanksgiving, big deal. Friends would come. At first, it was Dan who helped Fred. Then at some point, it was Fred helping Dan. And then the time came when Dan took over the entire Thanksgiving meal and Fred just looked over his shoulder. He was so creative and daring with his cooking too. One time he came over and Beth was preparing halibut and Dan just opened up the cabinets randomly and found dried blueberries and created a blueberry reduction sauce for the fish that was worthy of any James Beard chef. Dan had the good fortune to travel all over with his friends. There was the time he went to Brazil with a friend who practiced mixed martial arts, and then they turned around and went to China with just 1 week until Thanksgiving, returning to town 2 days before Thanksgiving, still able to make the whole dinner at Fred and Beth's house with a house full of friends. He was not only daring with his cooking, but he would also try eating food anywhere, with one exception. He refused to go to McDonald's in China. He was there for the Chinese food. Dan loved his parents. Beth, you worried about his health. That could be a source of friction. But he knew how much you loved him, and he knew. And Dan had an especially dear relationship with you, Fred. In fact, last Wednesday, he texted you and said, "You're my best friend forever." He called you the dude and the goat. And now you're known as the old goat. Your road trip with Dan last summer to drop off a car in Asheville was memorable. On that trip, you made plans to go to Costa Rica together this fall, to Africa sometime after that. One place, as Fred said, you would likely not find Dan was in a synagogue. But he was a spiritual person who deeply understood and demonstrated Jewish standards, ethics, and morality. When he and Fred were little, they got so squirrely at services that Fred had to sit between them. And eventually the family chose to spend holidays in the mountains, with prayer books and challah in hand. Before that was something in vogue. During COVID, Fred, you even wrote a service and you went to Red Rocks to pray together. You didn't invite me. I'm really sad about that. Maybe it was the mountains, or maybe it was you. But Dan internalized a deep commitment to the betterment of humanity, and that was evident all the time. It is tragic that his medical challenges got in the way of his living a longer life, but it does not make the sum of his life and his gifts less full. I hope there is a measure of comfort to all of you that while taken too soon, Dan stands before God full. And without a doubt, your lives are fuller because he was in it. Just listen to a few short Facebook posts about him from fans and friends. Dan was the glue. The world lost a once-in-a-lifetime kind of human. My heart grieves deeply. I'll love you forever, Dan Barnet. This world is not a better place without you in it. I can't even begin to explain the size of this man's heart. He was always there for me when I needed a friend, one of the first to show up at my house after my attack. He literally gave me coolers full of dog food. He touched so many lives, and he loved his friends like he loved his family. We are all crushed. In the Jerusalem Talmud, the rabbis comment on the verse, and none shall appear before me empty, and they postulated that it meant one's life is a gift not only while one is alive, but also after one's death. Dan's life will be a gift, always. The kindness and the values he modeled, the service and love he gave to others, the friendship he offered so willingly, are the gifts which will continue to enrich our lives and bring many more blessings, even while he's gone. Zecher Tzadik Livracha, the memory of a righteous person, is for an eternal blessing. Amen. At this time, a few friends have prepared some words. And so in this order, if you would, Andrew, Keith, Zach, and Sean will share words. If you need to adjust the mic, I will do it for you. There's a special secret to do it.
Before I get going, look around here and to the family, I haven't already. Just take a moment and just look around and see how transformational your son was. It's hard to overstate. I feel Dan here right now. And it's one of those unique situations here too, where I feel the gravity of grief shared equally amongst everyone who was fortunate enough to call him a friend. With Dan in my mind, and with the utmost respect to the family, understanding that grief, I would make whatever flimsy attempt I can to focus on what I loved about my friend. There's already been some amazing words said, Fred. You captured everything with what you said. My name is Andrew Subi. I had the privilege of calling Dan my dearest of friends for 20 years. For the record, I can hear Dan right now heckling me about my ill-fitting borrowed suit, and also making sure to know when I've been rambling for too long by telling me to wrap it up. I'll do my best. As I'm sure everyone here can relate, when I was asked to speak, my first reaction was absolutely. Of course. He's the best friend I've ever had. It's a foregone conclusion that I'd be speaking today. Then, like I'm sure everyone else here can relate as well, I was struck. What do I say? When I heard the news, it was one of those rare occasions where I was at a loss for words. How do I summarize 20 years of memories with someone like Dan? I did my best to wrestle with this the last few days and really decided to focus on our friendship. If you stood Dan and I side by side and looked at us, you looked at our life paths, where we ended up. Our friendship, honestly, doesn't make sense. We're nearly total opposites. We didn't share pastimes, definitely didn't share music tastes. Yet we shared a closeness unequaled in my life. I know that is the case for most of his friends. Whether you knew him for a year, or 20, or you call him a brother. Brandon and Fred said it best. Dan was the glue, and that's apparent today. He was the nucleus that tied the most diverse group of friends I've ever seen. I'm forever grateful for that. The exposure and experience I had meeting all of you is something that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. It's made me a better person. Dan and I didn't share a lot of experiences together later in life. In fact, we grew closer the longer I was gone and the further I went away. For Dan and I, being together and talking to each other was the experience. No matter where either one of us was in the world, we always found time to catch up. I'd lose track of time. Be 7,000 miles away and look down and realize I've been talking for 3 hours. I love Dan for that. I love Dan for always being available for his friends. But I also love Dan for not letting you get away with anything. Make no mistake, Dan told you what you needed to hear, not what you wanted to hear. He challenged me intellectually. He confronted me about my beliefs or opinions, but he never judged. And though he never judged, Dan also never budged. I've never met someone so at once open-minded and diverse in thought, but also unapologetically convicted in his beliefs and principles. He never went along with the crowd. I always respected him for that. The last time I saw Dan in Denver, I had a chance to see what he had created with his business. I was blown away, but not surprised. I told him how proud I was of him. Dan and I were good for that for each other. And it's one of the bigger things that I'm forever grateful for and will carry on with my future friendships. Dan and I never left anything unsaid. I learned that from Dan. When Dan told you he loved you, you knew that he meant it. I just want to end by saying how much Dan loved his family. I know it's been said before. Dan could go on and on about everyone in his family forever. Family was everything to him. Imagine how lucky I felt to have someone like that call me his brother. Fred and Beth, you produced a remarkable human being. The amount of people that are here that Dan touched are a reflection of that. He will live on with us forever.
Hi, everyone. I'm Keith Hardy. I'm trying to get through this, but obviously very hard for all of us. Dan and I met in the first grade, and starting very first day. You know, Dan's bubbly, rambunctious self. Like, I was hooked. I wanted to be friends with him. From there, we played every single sport together for years. Either his dad was the coach or my dad was the coach. We spent all summer long at South Shore Water Park. You know, just every single moment we could. And, you know, anybody who knows Dan knows that he loved to talk on the phone. When I, you know, thought of a million stories I wanted to tell about Dan's character and the love in his heart, but I just keep coming back to the first time he told me he loved me. We were on the phone. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, and we've been talking for 40 minutes, just like, you know, a couple of schoolgirls. But he, you know, at the end of the call, is wrapping it up and said, "All righty, well, I love you. I'll talk to you later." "Oh, I just got done talking to my grandma. Sorry." I'm like, "No, bro, I love you too." You know, after that, you know, Dan was not shy about, you know, giving you gruff, but he also told you how much he loved you. He had the biggest heart of anybody I've ever met. Anytime I ever had any problem, if I needed advice, if I needed someone to set me straight, Dan's the person I called. And he, you know, empathetically would, you know, tell me to get my crap together or whatever I needed to hear at that moment. I just can't tell you how sad I am about Dan. I would give anything just for a big Dan upgrade. I'm gonna miss him more than I could ever say. So sorry, Fred and Beth. Time I spent with your family as a kid meant so much to me. I love you guys.
is so tall. I'm gonna make this short and sweet. Dan was my best friend. He called me his brother as well as all these guys, and he meant it. He was a true friend, and he wasn't just a friend. He was a CEO. He was our best friend. He was a brother. He was an uncle, and he was a son. But most of all, he was a legend. We're all gonna remember him. He was such a legend. He was such a great human being. We're all gonna remember him, and he has a legacy that will move on. He was the wisest young man I knew. Always told it straight. He definitely put me in my place a few times when I deserved it. He cared for his friends and family, his co-workers, and of course Kuma. He knew how much we all loved him, and he had a heart of gold. This man was beautiful from the inside out. He was a true friend. There was nothing fake about him. He was there for all of us at some point or another. His smile and his hug were like therapy. All I could do is wish for a hug right now from Dan. He was taken from this world way too long. He left a lot of broken hearts. It's amazing to see how many people are here today who all love him. His impact on so many lives, more than we know. People that came out of the left field called me in, just crying about Dan. Thanks for everybody that's come here today. I think Dan would want us all to tell funny stories and give lots of hugs. He's smiling down at us saying, "Love you all like a love song."
Cool. All right. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Sean Hogan. I'm a friend of the late, great Daniel Barnet. Those words sting, saying, I'm honored to stand up here and speak about the love that we had for Dan. I'm going to do my best to represent his friends. As I look into the crowd, I see family, I see friends, I see loved ones, and we all here have two things in common. One, that we love Dan, and two, nobody wants to be here right now. Nobody. It's unfair to lose such a legend, such a great person at such an early age. It's not fair. He had so much life in front of him. He had so much life to live. He had so much love to give, so many jokes to tell, so much laughter to share. I know it's heartbreaking to all be here together in this moment. It's also heartwarming to feel your love. I'm going to try to speak from my heart, do the best not to get anything in my eye. But if I cry, I'm shedding a tear because I'm just so freaking sad that we lost such a great man. Great man doesn't do Daniel Barnet justice. He was better than great. Dan was a son. He was a brother. He was a proud uncle. He was a mentor, a business owner, a CEO, a coworker. But he had many titles. The greatest title that he had is he was a great friend. He was a great, great friend. This group of friends has been through a lot. Some of you may know our journey, some of you may not. We've been down this road before. A handful of years, we lost our good friend Billy. I stayed at Dan's house. I wrote Billy's eulogy on Dan's couch with Dan's support and guidance. Never in a million years thinking a handful of years later, I'd be standing up here talking to you about Dan. For those of you that know that he was a rock through all of us, through all our friend groups, when we needed anything, he was the guy you call. He was a friend who was there. He always answered the phone. He was much more than a friend, and as Fred touched on it so beautifully, he called us brothers. He treated us like family. With all that said, and all the pain, with all that said, all the pain, and all the anguish and emotions and this grief that we are stricken with, know that we can get through this with each other. Look around, feel the love. Know that this group is going to help you guys. We're here for you. Be there for others as Dan would be there for you. That's who Dan was. To Dan's parents, Fred and Beth, brother, Fred, your beautiful family, congratulations, baby on the way. I know this must just be so painful. This loss is just unconscionable, impossible to try to comprehend or wrap your brain around it. Know that Dan loved you so much. He loved his Sundays at his parents' house. I could call him every Sunday. I knew exactly where he was. He loved being an uncle. My phone is littered in text messages of his niece and nephew. He was so proud. And if you need anything, we're here. And I generally mean that at any point. I had the pleasure to call Dan a good friend for multiple decades. It was an honor, a privilege of mine. Dan treated me like family. You can tell by the quality of love that's in this place right now, the quality of person that Dan was. I was reading the comments on Facebook about his death, and they were just scattered with people that loved him, friends, neighbors, co-workers. Even his competition was chiming in, telling him how great Dan was. That's because they respected the man that Dan was. They respected how he treated others and how he carried himself. And that's a testament to who Dan is. How do you describe Dan? The energy was infectious, laugh was contagious. He had a strong comedic wit. He did one thing that was special. One thing that I think was an elite talent, a trait. He had the ability to give a great freaking hug. One of those hugs that like picked you up off the ground, your back would crack, your legs would go in the air, and at the same time, you're just filled with so much love. I'm gonna miss those hugs. If you could take away two things from this right now, two things of Dan's character and quality that I want you all to walk away with. Dan was kind. Dan was very kind. Dan was honest, like to a fault honest. Like as Subi said, he'd tell you the exact same thing you don't want to hear, but you needed to hear. That was Dan. The brutal reality, the truth, the no sugarcoating. That was a Daniel Barnet. And that's a rare quality. That truth and honesty is a rare quality today. Some people just tell you what you think you want to hear. Dan didn't do that. He was a true friend. You needed a reality check? That was Dan. And a kindness that was, my gosh, unwavering. Give the shirt off his back, even though it probably didn't fit. If we could all try to live our lives with just those two qualities, be kind, be honest, we would do Dan's memory justice. Kindness is free. Honesty is free. Do it for Dan.
Thank you.
All right, one thing I want to touch on, it's just Anderson's. My gosh, I'm so proud of Dan. The energy, the love, the passion he poured into that business, the blood, sweat, and tears, what he built, what he did, what he helped start. And his coworkers, they know the love and passion that Dan lived with. I just yesterday went to get some more dog food. And I went to the pet store and I stocked up on some extra. And the two people behind the counter knew Dan. And I had the unfortunate job of telling them of his passing. Their eyes welled up with tears. They got choked up. They were shocked. I didn't know them. They didn't know me, but we both loved Dan. In that moment, it just told you who he touched and who he was every day of his life. It wasn't an act. It wasn't to some people. It wasn't just to me. It wasn't just to these gentlemen standing up here. It was to everybody he came in contact with. Dan was a really good man. I could talk all day about Daniel Barnet. That's not why I'm up here. I'm going to wrap this up. Embrace your loved ones. Know that we will get through this together. When you're faced with tragic adversity, we have three choices. We can let it define us, we can let it destroy us, or we can let it strengthen us. We must be stronger. Now, as I say that, I can't help but sometimes being defined by death. These moments are part of tentpoles of our life that we live. Who we are in these moments, the character that we show in these moments, the love that we are able, the compassion we're able to give to others is defining. I want to thank everyone that traveled to be here. Please share your Dan hugs with all of us later tonight and your Dan stories. I would love to hear them all. Put Dan's family, friends, and loved ones in your hearts. It is our job right now to step up and take care of them. We're here for you. Dan, I love you. We love you. We always will love you. You're in our hearts. Know that you will live on through us forever, forever young. Smile down on us, Danny boy. Smile down. Say hi to our boys, Jarrett, Tyler, and Billy, and many, many others. I'll end this with something that we always said. Every conversation always ended with these 7 words, and the one that our good friend Zach Bauer said earlier. I love you like a love song, Daniel. All right, thank you guys.
You can hear me in the back. Give me a yeah. It is safe to say that I have heard the sound of Dan's voice more than anyone else in the last 4 years. For those that don't know me, my name is Tim Mahalik. I was Dan's tech guy and Anderson's employee number 3. There are a multitude of stories that I'm sure will be told about Dan today and beyond. I would just like to share a quick few moments. In 2019, I was driving Lyft and Uber, and I was so incredibly strapped for cash that at one point, even as a person that would never ask for help, I reached out to Dan to help me through a month on rent. Dan picked me up in his truck and asked me how much I needed. I said $400. He said, "So you need $800?" I said, "No, I just need enough to make it till the next check." Dan proceeded to pull out $1,200. Then he said, "You need more than you say you do. Let me know if you need more help." There was no payback plan or understanding of when I should be expected to repay him. He simply helped me out and sent me back into the world like a wild animal with dissolvable stitches. For those of you that don't know me, I've been a drummer for 24 years. Months later, I finally got around to asking Dan, "How can I pay you back?" I was like, "Is there a payment plan?" He said, "I got a better idea. You can give drum lessons to a young man that wants to play drums and needs a teacher." He was thrilled. I was thrilled to help an aspiring musician learn how to play the drums and repay my debt simultaneously. Dan wanted me to repay my debt by helping someone else. I have never met someone that loaned money and wanted repayment in the form of helping anyone else, unrelated to the debt. Dan cared. When I started working at Anderson's, Dan was using a MacBook with no external monitor, hunched over, taking orders from retail stores on the phone and manually typing them into QuickBooks. I went home and a few weeks into working there and looked online for business-to-business e-commerce platforms that integrated with QuickBooks to alleviate the constant labor burden of manually entering orders 10 times a day. Within a few months, I had implemented the system and researched. And shortly thereafter, we were saving dozens of hours a week, no longer having to manually input orders. I wanted to roll out the new ordering system within a month of getting it set up, and Dan had the foresight to roll it out over the course of 3 months by testing it with key stores, and only after it was working successfully, and we worked out the bugs, did we roll it out to all the stores. Dan had an incredible way of being patient until it was truly time to execute.
There would be times when I would communicate things that I needed to have happen in the business to Dan, and that Dan would take weeks or months to think about. And 6 months later, seemingly instantly, he would say, "It's time to implement the idea I had mentioned months ago, today." Dan was calculated. If I needed a plumber, who would I call for a recommendation? Dan. If I needed an accountant, who would I reach out to? Dan. If I needed a friend to talk about the problems in my life that would be willing to listen and offer meaningful suggestions, Dan. If I needed, Dan. If I needed, the answer was Dan. Dan was an answer, not a question. You never had to ask, could Dan or would Dan? Dan could, and Dan would. Dan was the guy that knew a guy. Never met a human being as connected as Dan Barnet. Look around you. This is a sample of people that Dan impacted that were able to show up on a random Thursday with 30 hours notice. Wherever you were with Dan in your life, I promise you, he had bigger plans for you than even you had for you. And I'm sure he told you that where you were at was not where he saw that you would be at. There were definitely times when I did not feel like I was living up to what Dan was desiring me to be, and I know that other people had felt the same way. In fact, Johnny was at the warehouse yesterday and was talking, and he said, Dan expected a lot because he gave a lot. If you get a chance, do me a favor and tell Dan Barnet what you think he should do, and let me know how that goes for you when you do it. We can't talk about Dan without talking about how stubborn he was. Dan. The Latin word for stubborn is pertinax, which means untamable, persistent, tenacious, and obstinate. Dan was untamable. Even in his later years, he was not partying or drinking. I would still not consider his behavior tame. He was relentless. Every time we climbed a hill in the business, all he could see were the mountains off in the distance beyond the next hill we were preparing to climb. Every milestone that was achieved only gave Dan further confidence to push forward with more ambition. There was no slowing down the untamed animal that was Dan Barnet. Every time we had an opportunity to take a breather in the business, he saw an opportunity to break new ground and overcome new obstacles. One thing he said a lot was know when to push and know when not to push. Dan was relentless. Dan didn't see any barriers in his way. In his own words, I'll just muscle through anything. I'm a mongoloid. Dan was seemingly indestructible. I personally watched him work 100-hour weeks for years on end with no breaks and no real vacations if you exclude hospital visits and short family trips. Many times I could not believe my eyes at his ability to bring his ideas into existence. Dan was exceptional at what he did. No business school or curriculum can create Dan Barnet. He was one of a kind and unreplicatable. I could not be more frustrated about how this situation turned out. I have had family members pass that didn't have 1/100th the effect that this has had on me. I am completely devastated, and I will be changing the way that I look at my health and interact with people in my life moving forward due to his influence. Finally, I would like to talk about Dan's most incredible, impactful, and unforgettable quality, his heart. Dan cared. Dan cared more than anyone about everyone. He cared so much about the people in his life that he sacrificed nights, weekends, holidays, morning, sleep, meals, health, money, pleasure, and his own desires to make those around him feel heard, appreciated, and taken care of. I have never, nor will I ever again meet a person as selfless, caring, understanding, emotionally intelligent, intuitive, and unapologetically themselves. He was the lead singer, and we were the band behind him just playing the hits. In the words of Dan Barnet, bless it and release it.
Thank you to all those friends for those really beautiful tributes. And while we won't be telling any more stories here, I just want you to know that that's the job following. And all are welcome to join the family at the McMillan's home following this service. They live at 989 East Radcliffe in Inglewood. And there'll be valet parking so that everybody can be there comfortably. And anyone who wishes to visit Fred and Beth tomorrow between the hours of 2 and 4 are welcome to their home at 9403 East Lake Avenue in Greenwood Village. Also, anyone wanting to make a contribution to honor Dan's memory, pick any need, person, charity of choice, and think of his kindness. In keeping with Jewish tradition, Dan is being housed in a plain pine box. And that's so he can return to the earth as he came from it. And before we do that and help prepare his final burial place, I invite you to please rise so that we can pray that his soul will be forever protected in the wings of God's presence. And we can thank God for the gifts of his life and the continued gift of his memory. El Malei Rachamim, Shochem Bamromim, Ametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, V'malot Kedoshim Utehorim Kezohar Harakia, Mazhirim, Et Nishmat Dov Nachman Ben Ephraim Ubat Yaleah, Shehalach Leolamo, Began Eden Tehimenuchato, Ana Bal Harachamim, Hasti Rehu Beseter Kanat Fecha Leolamim, Utzror Bitrachaim Et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, Ve'anuach Beshalom Amishkavo, Ve'namar Amen. God exalted, full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence. Among the holy and pure, to the soul of Daniel Noah Barnet, who has gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you to remember all his worthy and righteous deeds. May his soul be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. Adonai, you are his portion, and may he rest peacefully, as we all say together. Amen. Please join now in the mourner's Kaddish. Some of you have the words. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma tibrach shirtei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon, v'chayei t'chol beit Yisrael, v'agala u'bizman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lamei amaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitfa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shmei t'usharich le'ela min kol verchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechemata da'amiran v'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Ose shalom b'ramah, Huya aseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. Makom yinachem etchem b'tov shalom v'yitzim v'shamayim. May God comfort all of you along with all others who mourn. It is a sacred obligation. We call them mitzvot. It is a mitzvah to accompany a person and to help prepare for them where they will rest eternally. And the opportunity to do this gives us a rare experience, something called a chesed shel emet, a kindness that is true, a true kindness, because it can't ever be reciprocated. This is something you're doing for Dan. And so we do this in a few different ways. It's both a practical, we have a practical responsibility to cover him with the earth that's gonna hold him. And also, we do it ritually and ceremonially. So if it is your custom, some people, we use shovels, but they're not shovels for this act. So some people use the back of the shovel, so it's not really a shovel, it's an instrument for doing a sacred act. And also, we don't pass the shovel one to another, lest it appear that we rush or take any pleasure performing this duty. So I'm going to invite first Dan's immediate family to participate. And then it seems that there are shovels on either side here. And then the friends can, whoever wishes, you are not obligated, but we are going to stay until until the casket is covered.
Oh. Ah. We'll form two lines for anybody who'd like to help form two lines on either side. $30 years.
Created.
I've seen it happen. I understand
They're doing good.
I do.
And I'm not a bit surprised. I'm glad you were here because I could have talked to you about it all day. Can you see it? At first, they said it everything. Special forces, the military. When they said he was 7,000 miles away, he only had one. Thanksgiving in Nashville. Yeah, your last.
Thank you. It's an unformed thought.
But he did have people.
John and I. Interesting collection.
Look after you.
I've never heard. Oh, wow.
He didn't do any work with it. He put it to the next level.
No, you guys really.
You know all those words?
Together. No, see, I was gonna come down. You're a wonderful rabbi.
I gotta find you the word.
Yeah. You don't have to worry. That's your job.
I'm glad you got to know him too. You see his dog?
Thank you.
What's going on? I couldn't. Stories on the other side. I mean, wow. He was so full of love with joy. Everybody.
I was thinking of, I don't know where that
Fried.
came. I don't know.
And the cookies.
And the cookies, there you go.
Well, except the fact that
It's exactly. You didn't know. Dreadful man. And I also spoke to my son about the dog, about the food. No.
We all go.
Oops.
tell you what, doing all this rites, I feel a lot better.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
Beautiful. And you make sure you get copies. Look how many people. It's amazing.
We haven't told me in 30 years. She's never seen this kind of outfit.
Of love.
Love.
Of love for your
100%.
son. Yeah,
You gave him that.
You taught him all those things.
That taught him
You too.
the good stuff. I taught him the other stuff.
The fun stuff.
I taught him how to
The
live.
jokes.
I taught him how to live. She taught him how to love.
Good.
See, that's good. But make sure you have copies of all those.
Wow.
Yeah, love, 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 love.
So glad I got it.
Yeah, he is.
Crazy.
Yes. Dude talks so much about the guys. It's just such a thing.
Yeah, it's like sorry, my folks figure. I can't pour out. Thinking about you guys.
So sorry. You know, Daniel.
You reminded me.
I'm trying. I'm trying.
We'd be fighting. Yeah, go home.
Just want to give you a hug. Yeah, you gotta living on a table. But I wanted you to know my family is all buried right across the street here. So to be here is significant now. Any extras? Yeah.
I will hold on to one. 'Cause that's my and I always I want damn 100 other friends. I mean, every time I came over to see Taya, me too. But just the way it's take it forever. Oh, it's true. So, you know we love you, your family. Give you a hug like you tell me to. No.
And everyone said he was their best friend. Yeah. Like 12. That's yes. Different kinds of I thought about oh my god. Oh, so
They were.
The only thing that irritated her was that I was like, I hope it's not a particular reservation. That's what she was always like. Yeah. She'd say, go for a walk. I know. She'd like,
I tell you what, as painful as this is, just hearing that from so many and seeing this, really.
We saw each other regularly. We had no choice but to be okay. And I'm sure.
I am. Valerie.
Yeah.
Like personally, I had to talk regularly about all of
Yeah, no choice. Deal with me.
Yeah.
Sorry for your loss. Just remember me for a blessing.
Remember me, Dustin? Oh my gosh, I know it's been, I'm so sorry, but man, I fucking love Dan so much. Man. He's the best in the world, but man. I'm so sorry. That's how I know. I all I've been thinking about is just how, like, I'm like, man, if I could just get one more Dan hug, just be wrapped right in him. Let me know if you need anything, Fred. I'll try to come stop by tomorrow for sure. Yeah, definitely for sure. Well, I hope everything goes as well as it can. So I know it's yeah, exactly for sure. Well, you know he's loved beyond a belief.
How are you? I don't think we've even met before, but I'm so sorry. This is Betty and his mom and his brother. I'm so sorry. Did you know the? Oh yeah, of course.
Just 2 lines facing.
No, why were we shot?
Hey guys.
She wanted me to say hello. She's doing all right.
Saw you had to go through this again.
Everybody else.
Too many people.
Yeah.
I know.
Wall. Friendship.
My brother's dog. Rush. Dan used to take care of Rush. My brother's dog. Brett would take care of Kuma all the time they were together. I got all these videos of Kuma and Rush together.
It's quite the pair.
Whose dog is
Oh, that's Kuma.
it? That was
Dan.
Kuma. I thought so. Yeah. That is Kuma. Yeah, absolutely.
Well.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
How you doing?
Maybe that's maybe they're trying to get out of here.
Yeah. I think that could be.
There's Kuma.
Yeah, I already pet.
Life so much better. You brought the joy.
Oh, I
Our pain were hopeless times. And I thank all of you enough for your kindness and your love and being here and the wonderful stories that you shared. And I hope you will share some happy, crazy stories because that's who he was. And at our house and at the museum. Thank you.
And I think Kuma just took off.
No, yeah, I guess that's right. I got you.
Let's go.
Special.
Okay. Let's know what plans.
Yeah, I'm going now. I'm going to go.
You're gonna go.
Tomorrow, I'm going to the reception. Starting right now.
Oh, it is. Oh.
Tomorrow,
Oh, that's.
2 to 4. But it's like a weekly thing, but it's like they're opening up like a 2-year window. That'll be at the house stand. That's in Greenwood Village. Yeah. So if you guys want-
Concludes the memorial service.
Oh.
But I can
Oh, yeah. A few years ago. At dance house, it was great. I was going over to dance house. And you guys were there. Yeah. But I tried to visit you guys. Okay. Yeah, we are.
Yeah, I love it.
I was thinking of booking this on a bunch of